Welcome to the Matt Cuda Photography Podcast, a podcast about nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. And welcome back to the podcast. Episode 13, Part 2 of the Florida Birding Special. As I stated in the first podcast, I love and am rapidly accepting Florida as the birding location in the United States of America. It may actually be the best place in the world. I don't know. Having not been everywhere in the world, I can't say that. But I am totally impressed with Florida, the amount of species, the fact that I have access to both an East Coast and a West Coast, frankly, in one day if I wanted to. And it just, also, something I didn't mention last time, Florida is a vacationer's paradise. And so you're not very far any direction from civilization. So if it kind of scares you to be out in the middle of nowhere, realize that Florida has a lot of touristy areas. Anyway, this episode, I'm going to take you with me to a place called Fort DeSoto Park on the western side of, actually along the Gulf of Mexico. Now, this location is just south of St. Petersburg. It is an island, and it does have a fort on it. It is a fort that was abandoned by U.S. troops in the early or mid-1920s. Today it's a park, and a lot of tourists come there to see the fort. They come there to fish on the pier, and most of them come to lay on the beaches. For the wildlife photographer, it's all about the birds. Okay, there are, even on a bad day here, there are birds to photograph. And at certain times of the year, it can be just covered with birds. My trip there a week or two ago, not a lot of birds, but certainly enough birds to make it worth my while. So let's just get right into it. Fort DeSoto. What I wanted to do today is talk about the images that I produced that day, the different species of birds that I ran into, and how I photographed each species, and maybe give you a better lay of the land. One of the things that I really upset me or made me uneasy was it was difficult to do research on this area. There were articles that were written about Fort DeSoto and birding, but they didn't give you specific locations. I'm actually going to give you some specific locations, okay? I know, God forbid somebody should go and take the same photograph I did. I'm not going to mention any names, but there are some photographers out there that, they'd rather give you their kidney than tell you what birding location that they've been to. And I just don't buy into that. I'm not in this to keep things from you, I want you guys to get out there and get some of the same photographs that I did. Okay, so Fort DeSoto. I put a link in the show notes to the Flickr album. And what I'm going to do, just like last week, go ahead and open that up. I'm going to go through each image, and we're going to actually talk about each one in depth and how I took the photograph. Okay, so the first image is of a brown pelican, specifically a brown pelican in flight. And let's talk about this shot, because this is a shot that you can get not just in Florida, but frankly anywhere up and down the East Coast. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring this one up. The brown pelican is a native species all the way up the eastern seaboard of the United States. They frequent places like piers, for example, fishing piers, boat docks, marinas, and so forth. But they're also found near jetties, flying up and down the beach, where they dive down and catch fish to eat. I like them. I like pelicans. I can't fully explain to you why. They're not a particularly beautiful bird, although the white variety is is quite pretty. The brown pelican is not particularly beautiful, but I find them very interesting. They're large. The way that they eat is interesting. So I photograph them whenever I can. Now, the interesting thing about this shot to me, this image was shot at 600 millimeters, and a lot of photographers will shy away from what's called the pancake shot, and the pancake is where the bird's wings are level, particularly level from the side. This is an example of where you kind of, it's okay to shoot the bird with its wings flat because he's kind of in a bank. And not only that, but we have these beautiful feathers on the ends of the wings that make almost finger-like gestures, and I really like that about it. When I can get a bird, when I can photograph a bird with the ends of their feathers in that position, I just love it. So brown pelican, hey, go for it. You can get these shots any day of the week. ISO 400, shot at 600 millimeters, 1/1600th of a second, f6.3. The next image, another common bird at Fort DeSoto and, frankly, up and down the East Coast. However, the laughing gull, as pictured here, doesn't always look like this. As a matter of fact, when it's in non-breeding plumage, it's rather boring and ugly. It has a white head, not a black head, and the white above its eye and below its eye actually becomes a gray color. So the bird itself looks entirely different during breeding season. I find the bird extremely handsome during the breeding season, as this one's pictured here. Now it helps to do what I did here, which is try to get him while he's preening instead of sleeping or just being a gall. I tend to like these type of photographs. In this image, if I could change anything, and this is something that you need to think about when you're photographing. If you look down at the bottom, just above the copyright symbol, you'll see a band of kelp right there. And that band is, I hate it when it does that, to be honest with you, because it looks like junk. It just kind of junks up the picture, clutters up the picture. But I still like the image. I think it's a fine image. Notice that the light is directly behind my shoulder. This is, I think this was about 7:30 a.m., maybe 7:45. The light's coming in literally flat right above the horizon and lighting the bird up. Now, why is that a good thing? Why is that lighting from behind me a good thing? Because the reason that's important, birds are different from other subjects because birds have feathers, and feathers are refract light in different ways, and so you tend to have a much prettier image with light coming from behind your shoulder. This is one of the things that you hear other pro photographers telling you to do, which is make sure that you're on sun angle. This is called sun angle. Artie Morris often calls it that. Now this one, I'm a little bit off sun angle here, but still it's predominantly over my shoulder. This is shot at 388 millimeters. This bird is very, very close. So this is a shot that anyone can get with a 100 to 400 lens or a 70 to 300 lens. Notice I'm shooting down in the basement too on the ISO. I'm down at 200 ISO here, so very little noise. I got a high shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second. I like it. It works for me. And it's a bird that you can photograph up and down the East Coast or Florida. The next image, this is the first time that I can think of that I've actually photographed a black-bellied plover. Now, in this image, he's lost some of his black. He's probably moving out of breeding season. And so we're getting a little bit of modeling, but you can still see where he was fully black probably, a couple weeks before this. So this was more, for me, this was more of a documentary shot for me. But I want to bring up a couple things about this photograph, especially for the beginners. What you'll often hear about is the rule of thirds, or even beyond the rule of thirds, photographing your subject off center. What this image has is a lot of negative space. So to the left of the bird's beak, you're going to see a big wide space right there. I don't know all the science behind this. I just know that a photograph that is off center oftentimes is more pleasing, unless you are going for symmetry. When you're going for symmetry, you really want to center that subject because you want everything to be mathematically symmetrical. But photographing a subject off center, it does something. It provides a little more room in front of the animal, so he has more room to walk into the scene. But it also gives you that negative space, which it kind of makes you feel uneasy sometimes. But yet it draws your attention into the scene. It's a very strange thing, but it's something that photographers have been practicing since almost the camera was invented. So I highly encourage you to use that quote rule, but you don't have to. It's not something that if you shoot every photograph off center, after a while it becomes passe. You need to know when to shoot centered and when to shoot off centered. Here I had no particular attention gathering detail in this scene, so by shooting off center, I helped this photograph immensely, I think. But there you go, black-bellied plover, 600 millimeters, 1/2000th of a second, ISO 400, f6.3. And by the way, here's another interesting little tidbit here. I shot this with my Canon 1D Mark II. That's right, you heard it, an 8 megapixel camera from, when was it created? 2006, 2005, somewhere around there. Still going strong. It's still my number one birds in flight camera, even though I own a 7D. So don't get hung up on megapixels, guys. You know, concentrate on making great photographs. By all means, go ahead and buy a high megapixel camera if you can afford it. But don't buy one just because you think it's going to make you a better photographer. More megapixels does not make you a better photographer. What it does do, it allows you to print larger. Okay. It also allows you more cropping room. So, if I had a 20 megapixel camera, I could have done a lot more in post production by cropping. What you're seeing here is pretty much full frame. Okay. The other thing that an 8 megapixel camera does, and I love this about it, it forces you to get it right in the camera. It teaches you to be a better photographer. You've heard people talk about take one lens out and just see what you can do with it. Force yourself to use one lens. I would say force yourself to use an 8 megapixel camera for a while. You can't go back and post and crop that thing down to 3 megapixels. Okay, it's not going to look very good. So that 8 megapixels, you got to get that framing right. You got to get close and you got to get it right. So go ahead and try that sometime. Go buy yourself an old 8 megapixel camera. See what you can do with that thing. I challenge you to. It's funny. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit trail, but photography, just like a lot of disciplines, is one of these things where people look down their nose at you. I heard somebody the other day. I couldn't help but laugh. It was a pro photographer, of course. They're usually the worst. But he said, "Oh yeah, that's back when I shot that old 1D Mark IV." Well, the 1D Mark IV is only 2 generations out. That's it. And it was a 16 megapixel camera, and he's all, oh yeah, that was that old thing. You know, what a sad way to view photography. Everything is about the machine, and nothing's about you. It's about the machine. Now, anybody that knows me knows that I believe 100% that a photograph is a combination of the machine and the man. Okay? And both those together are a synergy. I hate that word, but it makes the most sense here. Are a synergy that produces quality photographs. But don't think just because you've got the latest 5DSR or the 1DX Mark II coming out here, don't think that just having that piece of equipment is going to somehow make you awesome. Because it's not. It's just not going to. Can it help you? Is it a tool? Absolutely. Can you do things with that I can't do with my 1D Mark II? Yes, you can. You can do incredible crops. You're going to have an incredible detail in the feathers, so on and so forth. But you know what? I guarantee you, you could put this 1D Mark II in the hands of the most skilled photographer in the United States, and I could give you the latest 1DX. You know who's going to come back with the better photographs? The guy with this old 1D Mark II is going to. Because it's all about skill. Okay, it's all about skill and getting out there and doing this stuff. Okay, I'm off my soapbox on that crazy conversation. I'll probably never get sponsors for this podcast because I don't believe that the latest gadget's going to solve all your problems. Okay, the next image is an image that you can get at Fort DeSoto a lot. If you are an Osprey fan, and I know you're out there because I see a lot of photographs of ospreys. Now, I'm not showing you this photograph because this is a great osprey image. Matter of fact, this is a pretty mediocre image. But I do have it here to show you that there are a lot of ospreys here. When I was there were at least 3 nests that I was aware of. And they are constantly circling. So there's more than 3 nests. There are probably a dozen nests in that area alone. And they did have chicks when I was there up in the nest. The nest platforms are very high. So you're not going to be getting shots of the nests and the chicks in the nests and so on. But the opportunity is there for shots of osprey carrying fish, specifically sea fish, which you may not get. I saw one guy had a photograph of an osprey carrying a flounder, which was a very interesting shot. So, by all means, if you're an osprey addict, this is a good place to go. This was taken just in the parking lot behind the fort. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention where these were taken. So we'll have to go back and do that when we get done. This one was taken right at the fort. Actually, if you're behind the fort in the parking lot, there's a pole nesting platform to the right, and this was where this was taken. 451 millimeters, 1/2000th of a second, f6.3, ISO 320. Okay, the next image. First of all, where was this image taken? This was of a black skimmer. This image was taken if you go through the main gate of Fort DeSoto Park and you get to a T in the road and you make a right, you will go out to what is called North Beach. If you park your vehicle at the south end of the North Beach parking lot and get out and walk toward the beach, this was where these skimmers were located. I was the first one there. There were no other photographers there. And I used a technique that is very common in shorebird photography, and this is I would not classify the black skimmer as a shorebird, but he is definitely a water bird, and he gathers his meals from the ocean. This is a good portrait image. I did crop this down a hair bit. This is not full frame. I did an 8x10 of it. 8x10 crop. Shot this at 600 millimeters, f6.3, 1/1000th of a second at ISO 400. Now I am on sun angle. I am right on sun angle. The sun is directly behind my shoulder. I am laying on the beach facing the water, which is one way you can take photographs. You can also kind of move over at an angle. And a lot depends on how the sun angle is as well. Lots of good texture in the beak in this shot, even though it's an 8 megapixel camera. This shot gives you a good biological shot of the bird. In this case, we can see his lower mandible or his beak there. Notice how much longer it is from his top mandible and beak. That speaks so he can actually drop that lower jaw down while he's flying and scoop little critters out of the water that he can eat. A very unique bird. I don't know what I would compare him to. They have a coloration similar to a penguin. They're certainly not a penguin, but they do have that coloration. They're toucan-like in some ways because they have a very long beak, but a very unique and interesting bird. I'm glad that I had the opportunity to photograph them at Fort DeSoto. So, what's good about this image? Well, first, it's a perfect example of a tight portrait. If you'll look, the sun angle is behind my shoulder again. Look into his eye, you'll see that bright reflection in the middle. That's the sun. It's literally right above the horizon. If you look carefully in his eye, you'll see the horizon and then the sun right above the horizon. So this was taken at 7:30 in the morning. Sunrise was about, if I remember right around 7 o'clock. Now, the other great thing about, you'll notice this, if you're used to shooting in wooded areas or in mountainous areas, at the beach, you get great lighting right off. I mean, as soon as that sun hits that horizon, you can see in this photograph, I'm up to a thousandth of a second at ISO 400, at 7:30 in the morning. If you tried to do that in a Piedmont area or even a mountainous area, you may never get good lighting. So that's one thing great about the beach. You almost always have really, really good lighting. So just wanted to mention that. All right, the next image. Also another skimmer. Couple things to note here. One, it's vertical. By all means, don't just take horizontal photographs. If all you take is horizontal photographs, one, if you're trying to sell to a magazine, it'll be more difficult. And two, not everything fits into a horizontal image. Now, unless you're shooting a 5 DSR, then you can just crop vertical. If you're like me, you actually have to shoot vertical. You also have some gesturing here, what's often referred to as gesturing. The bird is actually, first, I like the angle of his head is actually, a little bit tilted, maybe a 3/4 angle. I like his catch light in his eye. And I like he's kind of ruffling his feathers here, so it gives a little bit of movement or action to the image. I think a very nice portrait, probably one of the better images from that day. The only thing I don't like about this image, and this is hard to avoid, yes, you can remove it in post. Did I? Am I going to? No. And that's the layering effect that you get here. If you look at this image carefully, you'll see there's like 3 to 4 layers. So at the bottom of the image, you have the berm of sand that is where the dry sand merges with the wet sand. And so this creates a berm that pops up a little bit. And what happens is that's out of focus in the foreground. And then the next layer, right just beyond it, is a layer of kelp and kind of junky shells and stuff like that. And then the layer beyond that is actually the wet beach that he's standing on. And then the layer beyond that is the actual waves. So you've got multiple layers here. And how you juxtapose those in the image can kind of make or break that image. I think it doesn't really hurt it here. It's down toward the bottom. It gives it a little more depth, I think. And the beautiful slate gray, blue, slate blue, whatever you want to call it, out of focus background is right on the money. This image was taken at 546 millimeters, f6.3, 1/1000th of a second, with my Sigma 150 to 600. The location is the same location as the previous image, so right there at the south end of the North Beach. The next image, oh man, I'll tell you what, this image, man, I love this image. It's very rare that I actually look at one of my pictures and think, that's just surreal. And this is something that that you may not think is unusual. But where I come from in North Carolina, I'm in the Piedmont of North Carolina, so I am off the coast and toward the mountains. You don't see stuff like this. When you see a great blue heron in the Piedmont of North Carolina, you're going to see it in a river, a lake, or a wetland. We To see a great blue heron walking down the beach and hunting the surf was just so weird. I had to get a photograph. Now, the interesting thing about this photograph is I was walking up the beach photographing shorebirds. I was the only one there at the time. Um, and I saw this heron way, way down the beach. And I said to myself, boy, that'd be an interesting shot, wouldn't it? So I kept walking, and as I walked, he got farther away from me, so he was walking the opposite direction. So I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. What happens if I lay down on the ground? So I laid down like a non-threatening way, and sure enough, that bugger turned and started walking toward me. And I let him come, and I took a few photographs, and he walked a few more feet. I took another photograph, and he walked a few more feet. Before he knew it, he had closed about 50 yards, and he was right in front of me here in this photograph. And this photograph is exactly what I wanted. I wanted a picture that showed a great blue heron walking in the surf and had some gesture, and that's exactly what I got. I got the heron. He's got his foot up in the air, giving us some gesture. It blew my mind. I can't, I don't know what else to say. I think I'm going to get this one framed, actually. This would make great art for the summertime, anybody's home. Lighten up a bathroom, anywhere really, but a bathroom would look great, a kitchen, a breakfast nook, or something like that. But yeah, this shot just blew my mind, completely blew my mind. Okay, so where was this shot taken? Okay, if you go up to the North Beach, you will have a massive parking lot. At the north end of that parking lot is an entrance to the beach, another entrance. Take that entrance. I walked in and I started moving up the coast. The coast actually turns into the end of the island right there, and so it forms kind of a little peninsula. And that's where this guy was. He was just walking down the beach. He probably does it every day. He's probably a regular, but to me, it's something I never saw. And isn't that what photography is all about? Isn't it about capturing that thing that you never saw? It's about telling that story to somebody else because you couldn't, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And so, the likelihood is that somebody else out there is also going to be intrigued by it. And so that's what we do. That's what's so exciting about this genre is we're telling stories. I've got this shot in time that will never go away. I'm going to make a print of it, and it's never going to go away until my grandchildren throw it away because they think Grandpa was an idiot for taking photographs. But anyway, I digress. But just awesome, totally awesome. The next photograph is probably my favorite image of the whole Fort DeSoto trip. It's of a willet, and it's running from a crashing wave. Now, I want to explain some stuff to you here. This was also taken on roughly in the same area that I photographed the heron, except maybe 100 yards south of that location. I'm set up. The sun is getting higher right now. The sun is, I think it might have been 9 o'clock, maybe about when I was shooting this photograph. Sun angle's still behind me. And a little bit to my left, it looks like, by the shadows. But this photograph has a couple things going for it. One, it has action. Okay, the wave crashing, freezing those water droplets in midair. Next, the willet is actually leaning while he's running. He's actually running at a pretty good pace right here. or if, I don't know if a willet runs. That's a kind of a fast walk, but I'll call it a run. And he's actually leaning, which really gives us that feeling that he's trying to get away from this wave. If you know anything about willets, they'll actually go out in the water farther than most birds. They have pretty long legs, but they still run from the waves. They don't want to get hit by a wave. That would be devastating to a bird. So we've got all that action. Now at the bottom of the frame, we've got something interesting going on here. This out of focus area is actually that berm I was telling you about. And what you've got is a reflection off that berm, which is causing it to look almost like the beach. Well, it is the beach, but it's causing another like almost three-dimensional layer here. And I think that helps add to the photograph. But this one went right out on my website immediately. I fell in love with this image. This was shot 562 millimeters, ISO 200, 1/1250th of a second, f6.3, and this was again shot with my 150 to 600. By the way, that lens is it's my little baby. I almost use it exclusively for my wildlife shots now. Okay, so that's the willet. There's one more photograph I wanted to share. It's another skimmer photograph. The reason I want to share this is the image is not tack sharp, okay? I'll just tell you that right away. It's not critically sharp. But I want to show it to you because I want to show the effect that you can get by including that berm in your photograph. When you shoot a telephoto lens, there's some weird optical stuff that happens where you can make things disappear. For example, if I shoot through a fence by focusing at a subject at a farther distance than the fence, I can literally, there's a scientific principle here that I am not aware of, but it makes the bars disappear. This is a similar thing when you're shooting that berm. What's happening? It looks like he's standing in like 3 inches of water. What he's actually doing is he's behind this berm, and there's some weird optical stuff going on where the berm is starting to disappear. Okay, yeah, it's weird. Okay, it's weird, and you have that in the water, and it makes it look like that all of this is just water, and in fact, it's water and sand, and it's really surreal until you actually go and do it. You won't know what I'm talking about. But so this photograph kind of shows you that piece. So I thought I would also throw out there. I'm done with the photographs, but I want to tell you also there are various species in this location that you may not find at other locations. Some of the pictures I didn't show you, I had some shots of a sandwich tern. There are also a lot of little shorebirds like other plovers, sanderlings, basically any kind of shorebird you can kind of think of reside here at one time or another. But at certain times of the year, this area is also flooded with migratory songbirds. And so you have to look that up on the internet when the best time to go for that is. But yeah, definitely give Fort DeSoto a try. It's really amazing. I felt that there were some interesting components to it. For example, on the Gulf of Mexico, at least in this area, you didn't get very big waves. So that can be an interesting component because the fact that I didn't have these big, huge waves meant that I could get that shot of the willet, and you could see the whole wave hitting behind him. If that had been a bigger surf, we wouldn't have really seen the top of that wave crashing. It would have just been a big wall of white. There's definitely some interesting things about the west coast of Florida that make it unique for photography. I also did, not too long ago, I did a podcast episode on Merritt Island, which is another great spot to go, and that's on the east coast. So basically, if you looked at a map of Florida, this whole trip of mine took place. If you were to just draw a line west southwest from Orlando. I traveled that direction, and if you were to draw a line east of Orlando, I traveled that direction to Titusville. That belt, if you will, down Route 4, that belt in through there is just a birding paradise. Also wanted to give a shout out, just in case he's listening. There was a gentleman that I met there from Nova Scotia, and there was a lady there as well. I don't remember either of their names. I don't know if I ever even asked them what their name was, but we had about a half an hour discussion, and I just wanted to say they were very helpful, and just a shout out to them. They helped me find some locations I was not familiar with. So it's always great. That's another awesome thing about getting out there in the field is the opportunity to meet other photographers, ask them questions, find out what gear they're using, where they've been, what they thought of the location, so on and so forth. But I do want to say that sometimes you go to a place like Florida or to a place like specifically to Merritt Island, or sometimes you'll go to DeSoto. You might not see that much, guys. You know, that's just part of the game. I was talking to that gentleman from Nova Scotia, and he said he'd been there, I think it was 9 days, and he was on his ninth day of photographing terns and skimmers. So he said day 9, more skimmers. So, but you know what? Turn that to your advantage. If you go there and all you're seeing is skimmers, you're going to have a great opportunity to get great shots of that one species. For example, once you get done with your basic portraits and flight shots, you can mix it up. Start doing some panning. Do something unique. Try some artistic representations. Try doing some composites of different birds. The sky's the limit. This is photography. This is not photojournalism. This is nature photography, wildlife photography. If you need to add a little contrast to your scene, you need to take out a rock that's in your way with Photoshop. Go ahead. Now, I personally kind of draw the line at doing things like that. I don't like to remove entire species from the photograph, or I don't like to make the bird look like something that it's not. Like I won't take a sandwich tern and make his feathers green. I don't believe in doing that, but that's just me. But I have no problem doing basic editing, like removing rocks, removing another bird's tail from the scene, adding contrast, dodging and burning, and so on. No problem with that. One more thing I want to mention before we move into the next segment. I'm going to get away from the travel stuff for a few episodes. So coming up, expect to see a kind of more beginners information, new photographer information like exposure and just various topics related to something that a new photographer would need to know. All right, let's move on to the know your subject segment. The sound you just heard was that of the brown pelican. The brown pelican, according to the Cornell's Lab of Ornithology, the brown pelican is a comically elegant bird with an oversized bill, sinuous neck, and big dark body. Squadrons of these glide above the surf along the southern and western coast, rising and falling in a graceful echo of waves. Brown pelicans are huge, stocky seabirds. They have thin necks, very long bills with a stretchy throat pouch, used for capturing fish. Their wings are very long and broad, and are often noticeably bowed when the birds are gliding. Adult brown pelicans are gray-brown birds with yellow heads and white necks. In breeding plumage, The back and sides of the neck turn a rich, dark reddish brown. Immatures are gray-brown above, with pale whitish belly and breast. Okay, so I kind of already talked about the brown pelican a little bit, but let's just talk about where to locate them one more time, just in case you missed it. Brown pelicans oftentimes are found around jetties, piers, fishing piers. By the way, if you want to photograph pelicans plunging headfirst into the water to get animals, I haven't done this at all, but I do know how to get them. If you go out to a fishing pier that's being used heavily, in other words, there's a lot of fishermen there. Look for these brown pelicans out there diving on big schools of fish. The fishermen will bring in schools of fish, and since I'm a fisherman, I know this. And the pelicans will come in, and they're amazing to watch. They're almost like watching an osprey. They'll come straight down and just slam into the water, and they'll get a big old fish in their pouch and go take off somewhere and eat it. Again, opportunities for flight shots, opportunities for diving shots, opportunities for portraits, because they will actually, a lot of times, you'll actually see them standing on pylons, marinas, and so forth. Great opportunity to get, just a portrait image. I'd like to, I am going to make that a priority. The next time I'm on a photography holiday to the beach, I'm gonna look to try to get some brown pelican shots. I don't have enough. I've got a few, but I don't have enough. So that's pretty much it for the brown pelican. I mean, they're very easy to locate, and honestly, that's something that you can ask the locals. That's another tip. Is, hey, where are you seeing a lot of pelicans? Most of the locals will know exactly where the pelicans are. Oh, there's 3 or 4 of them that hang out at Smith's Pier down here on 6th Street. I'm telling you, you'll get some great information from other people. Don't be afraid. This is something that's kind of been a problem for me in the past. I'm not a highly social individual. And one of the things that was hard for me in the past, and it still is to some degree, is asking people things. But you know what? You will learn so much by asking people locations for things. Where have you seen this bird before, and where? It's amazing the information that you can get. Anyway, that's about it for this episode. Like I said in the last episode, thanks for listening. By all means, please email me. If you're a beginner especially, I can probably answer 95% of your questions. Go ahead and send me an email, send me an audio file, a voice audio file, whatever you want to do, and I'll be more than happy to answer your question. And with your permission, if you want, I can even put it on the podcast so everybody can hear it. Because one thing I've learned is if one person has that question, I guarantee you there are probably 20 other, 30, 100 people more out there that have the exact same question. So don't be afraid to, again, we're back to this social problem that photographers have. Don't be afraid to ask me a question, or ask, your buddy a question, or ask, Art Morris or Moose Peterson or whoever. Don't be afraid to do that. That's one of the reasons that they're there. They like answering your questions. Anyway, that's it for this episode. Make it a great day. Get out there and enjoy nature. Thank you. Bye-bye. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.